Thank you for downloading the Hong Kong Writers Circle podcast. For more information, please visit our website hkwriterscircle.com. It didn't take a genius to see she was dead. The sensible thing would have been to call the police, to have explained exactly what had occurred, only I was frightened as to the conclusions they would draw. With the alcohol on my breath, I dreaded to think what they would assume. But what else could I do? I'm not sure what impulse possessed me next, but I thought of the hill not far from where I lived, dense vegetation at the bottom of it. Lifting the body, I started moving, supporting it as best I could, terrified of what someone would say if they saw me. I got the body down the back stairs and had several seconds of panic before I exited the building through the service entrance to where the rubbish was stored before being collected. From there, it was a short walk to the top of the hill. Lifting the body, I dumped it over a short wall and watched as it tumbled down the hillside. Halfway down, it stopped, and my breath caught in my throat. I thought I might need to climb after the body to ensure it was out of sight, but then gravity kicked in again, and seconds later it had disappeared into the undergrowth. What is Gothic literature, and why has the Hong Kong Writers Circle devoted an entire anthology of short stories to the genre? That extract, from Writers Circle member Ian Greenfield's The Girl Above, suggests a strong association with horror, but does Gothic fiction have its own defining characteristics? The word Gothic has a huge diversity of cultural meanings, and to be honest, the first one in my mind is the fashion/musical subculture that emerged in the late 1970s and was still a major part of the alternative scene when I was at university, and is indeed today. Think black hair, black clothes, and metal. Gothic describes architecture, art, typography, an extinct language, and, originally, East German tribes at the time of the Roman Empire. In literature, its meaning is similarly fluid, although most critics agree that Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto is the first Gothic novel, published in 1764. Here's an extract. The lady, whose resolution had given way to terror the moment she had quitted Manfred, continued her flight to the bottom of the principal staircase. There she stopped, not knowing whither to direct her steps, nor how to escape from the impetuosity of the prince. The gates of the castle, she knew, were locked, and guards placed in the court. Should she, as her heart prompted her, go and prepare Hippolyta for the cruel destiny that awaited her, she did not doubt but Manfred would seek her there, and that his violence would incite him to double the injury he meditated, without leaving room for them to avoid the impetuosity of his passions. Delay might give him time to reflect on the horrid measures he had conceived, or produce some circumstance in her favour, if she could, for that night, at least, avoid his odious purpose. Yet where conceal herself? How avoid the pursuit he would infallibly make throughout the castle? As these thoughts passed rapidly through her mind, she recollected a subterraneous passage which led from the vaults of the castle to the church of St. Nicholas. Could she reach the altar before she was overtaken, she knew even Manfred's violence would not dare to profane the sacredness of the place, and she determined, if no other means of deliverance offered, to shut herself up for ever among the holy virgins whose convent was contiguous to the cathedral. In this resolution, she seized a lamp that burned at the foot of the staircase and hurried towards the secret passage. It is easy to see many of the hallmarks of Gothic fiction, even in this small extract. There are more, as J.A. Cuddon elaborates. Most Gothic novels are tales of mystery and horror, intended to chill the spine and curdle the blood. They contain a strong element of the supernatural, and have all or most of the now familiar topography, sights, props, presences, and happenings. Wild and desolate landscapes, dark forests, ruined abbeys, feudal halls and medieval castles with dungeons, secret passages, winding staircases, oubliettes, sliding panels and torture chambers. Monstrous apparitions and curses, a stupefying atmosphere of doom and gloom, heroes and heroines in the direst of imaginable straits, wicked tyrants, malevolent witches, demonic powers of unspeakably hideous aspect, and a proper complement of spooky effects and clanking spectres. The whole apparatus, in fact, that has kept the cinema and much third-rate fiction going for years is to be found in these tales. The most popular sold in great quantities, and they were read avidly. So, Gothic novels were the best sellers of their time, and the writers were some of the earliest literary hacks, most notably Edward Bulwer-Lytton, whom we'll get to later. But it has a respectable side too, with authors such as Dickens, Sir Walter Scott, and the Brontes all contributing novels within the genre, not to mention certain seminal works by Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker, and much of the output of one Edgar Allan Poe. More recently, there are also Mervyn Peake, William Faulkner, Daphne du Maurier, and of course, Stephen King. But where does the Hong Kong Writers' Circle fit into all of this? On the 1st of March 2015, I interviewed Edmund Price, co-editor of Hong Kong Gothic, the latest Writers' Circle anthology. I started by asking him for the main thrust of the collection.
Yes, I was one of the editors, along with two other colleagues, Kate Hawkins and Marnie Walker. The pitch was, as with all of our anthologies at the Writers' Circle, to write something of interest to the author and the audience about Hong Kong in the style of the theme chosen. And so the theme chosen this year was the Gothic literary genre. So the pitch was a challenge to our members to write something about Hong Kong or set in Hong Kong using that literary genre as a theme.
Okay, how did you arrive at the idea of Gothic as a genre to use?
Well, actually, it was a little bit difficult to decide what to use in this latest anthology. It is actually our 10th in a row, which is good news. But the problem of doing 10 in a row is that the number of original ideas becomes fewer and fewer. So we pitched it to the audience to make suggestions, and we had a number of suggestions that did revolve around ghosts and the supernatural. We had, in fact, done several years ago something called Haunting Tales, which was ghost stories. And so after considering it a bit further, we decided that perhaps literary genre hadn't been done for a while, and so we would choose one that incorporated ghosts as part of that, which was Gothic.
Right, that's the nice thing about Gothic in a way, is that it can include the supernatural, but it doesn't necessarily have to. It's a lot about sort of maybe atmosphere and landscape and architecture and things like that as well.
Absolutely, and actually we did find that there was a general sort of unfamiliarity amongst the members as to what Gothic literature was and constituted. So when sending out the pitch to call for submissions, we did actually give a list of novels that are generally regarded as being within the Gothic genre.
Okay.
Without listing them all, these might include in addition to the sort of the expected ones like Dracula and Frankenstein, you might include Great Expectations or Wuthering Heights, which would be more atmospheric, and something like The Picture of Dorian Gray or Rebecca, and even something more contemporary like Salem's Lot or The Shining could be regarded as Gothic.
Right. When I was researching, there was, those were the books that came up, and even something like Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey came up as well.
Yes, that's right. I think it's the atmospheric point that you were making, Simon. Wuthering Heights, of course, is defined by the atmosphere of the Yorkshire moors, and Northanger Abbey is in some ways classic Gothic insofar as it's a gloomy a house in a secluded environment where mysterious things are happening up staircases and behind slamming doors.
Right. But at the same time, Jane Austen was kind of satirizing the genre, which in a sort of a way, we're maybe not satirizing it for our purposes, but certainly taking a new look at the genre.
Sure. And, it was within the scope for people to satirize it. And a couple of people did take a satirical attitude. But in fact, we found that most people took a fairly straightforward attitude towards it. And some of the things that they brought out were general human concerns, but also concerns for people in Hong Kong, like love, which is an important element to Gothic literature, sort of tragic love, and the need to protect or defend your loved one, or to deal with a challenge to your loved one. And in relation to that, there was death and the avoidance of death. And so, I think these were strong Gothic themes that our contributors sort of warmed to.
And this fed into how the anthology was finally structured with the 4 sections, right?
That's correct. So what we did was, when we had finished reviewing the stories, we decided to try to break them down into subsections, which is what we usually do with anthologies. And so we divided them into broad themes of comeuppance, somebody getting payment for something bad they've done, mysterious circumstances, uncertainty as to outcome, and then a closure. Closure usually, but didn't always mean death. And we gave it sort of slightly humorous subtitles of, a door slams, a stair creaks, a casement sunders, a window is broken open, and the candle snuffs. So it was the idea of an approaching menace, of a terrified heroine cowering in her bed, which you can see as sort of satirizing the concept of Gothic as well.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the there is a sort of an undercurrent of almost it being tongue in cheek, as we sort of approached it.
Yes, as I say, that option was open to writers, but in general, they warmed to the idea of using the sort of the undercurrent of superstition that exists within Hong Kong and is very present in the Chinese psyche, and elaborating on that, whether it was Chinese supernatural and mysticism, or whether in the case of one case it was Balinese, or whether in another case it was European. So there were probably 7 or 8 stories that involved the supernatural of one sort of nationality or another.
Right. So aside from the sort of supernatural vein, in what ways would you say that Hong Kong is Gothic, and therefore how does the Gothic genre lend itself to Hong Kong writing?
Well, it was a challenging genre, I won't deny it. But I think actually people rose to the challenge, in a very constructive and very successful way. But we did have a significant number of stories that were set within Shenzhen, which has a nice characteristic of a lot of sort of old buildings and narrow streets, stepped roads, and things where you can imagine, we're a long way from the crumbling castles of Europe, but if you like, you've got crumbling masonry and old buildings in Hong Kong, and narrow streets where anything might happen, including murders, and including people getting their own back for injustice, as we had in several stories. And then we also had stories set out in the new territories, particularly in or close to country parks, where mysterious things could occur as well, and you can get back to nature, be close to where people have been burying their dead, and ancestral spirits might be residing. But you're right, it's not a natural one, so people did have to think laterally about how they wanted to do it. But we had mysterious undead creatures in the canyons of the MTR, and we had people who, people who might be suffering from some mysterious ailment, even in quite normal circumstances, walking around in Central. So people came up with very original ideas, and it was a nice mix of the contemporary and the past, and the urban and the rural.
Right. So, aside from some of the novels that you suggested, and what were the other guidelines that you gave to authors? I mean, as you said, it was a bit of a tricky genre to get into for some people.
No, we gave them total freedom. So the only real guidelines that we have for our anthologies are: the stories must be less than 5,000 words, and they must be set in or substantially about Hong Kong or Hong Kong people. Within that, there was complete freedom for people to write as they chose. And I would say that probably half of them involved expatriates living in Hong Kong, and the other half involved, local Hong Kong people.
Mm.
And they varied from students uncovering a vampire in their flat to a local shopkeeper putting dead birds around Hong Kong as a protest against treatment to a murder taking place in Shengwan,
Mm.
to an old man who's lost his shop due to rising rents, who decides to get his own back on the person who's destroyed his livelihood, to a familial revenge between a husband and a wife,
Mm.
to a desire for a father to protect his young son from a malevolent spirit in the New Territories. So there was a nice mixture to and a battered wife also murdering her abusive husband.
Mm. Time lapsed, and Moon prepared to start. She made her way back to the harbour, to the Star Ferry Pier, nestled in prime location at the end of the impressive promenade, looking out to the iconic view of lit-up skyscrapers. It was home to the light show, a disappointing recipe of lasers and terrible music, and the Avenue of Stars, where Bruce Lee was forever kicking in the light of tourists' camera flashes. Moon ascended the stairs to the top deck. She waited for a few late-night revellers to pass through the turnstiles, then put up her hood, climbed out of one of the windows looking over the sea, and pulled herself onto the roof, using pipes as footholds. She climbed well, strong hands, light frame, small feet. On the flat green roof, she carefully made her way to the front of the pier, the harbour side. She drank in the lights in rectangles, angles, curves, and colour from her hidden perch above Victoria Harbour. It never failed to stir something in her, standing before the skyline representing capitalism and land-grabbing. There was more to life than this oppressive and synthetic landscape. The huge buildings vandalizing the rock underneath were the great pistons of the machine, the city constantly in motion and supporting so much life, good and bad. It was undeniable in its power. From her bird's-eye view, it looked like a floating fortress of the future. The black waves below her throbbed with this fallout of progress, a whole lot of rubbish. Moon removed her backpack and carefully laid the contents onto the hot, hammered metal covering. She took the largest package and slid the sheath away from the inner tray. A fat green and yellow bird greeted her. Taking it out and leaning forward onto the edge of the roof, she let her feet dangle over the side. She used the wire sticking out from the bottom of the claws to attach the Japanese white-eye to the pipe running along the roof. The pier looked like a Star Ferry boat itself, with its curved green and white exterior, boats that had transported generations of Hong Kongers back and forth across the harbour from Central to Tsim Sha Tsui. The seats reminded her of safety bars on old fairground rides. The other two birds took their turn at sitting pretty on the edge, wire stilettos holding them in place, their new eyes staring out at the impressive view. Moon took photos of them from various angles. She tried to imagine the original harbour before the land was reclaimed, and the rocks and hills and woodland before man came and started to build. "What do you think you're doing?" a hard voice shouted behind her. That was The Taxidermist by Sophia Greengrass.
I wanted to ask, what does Gothic mean to you? And especially as an historian, what does Gothic mean to you? And do you feel that it's just a literary genre, or do you feel that it's sort of become something else? What are your thoughts?
Yes, that is a tricky question, Simon. I think for me, as a historian, I do see Gothic as reflecting a very specific period in the development of Western literature, middle 19th century. But I think it's an attempt for people to root themselves in the history of their own society. And I think that was why here it was also a very useful way to re-examine what Hong Kong is, which is something that we always attempt to do with our themed anthologies, which is to look at Hong Kong in a new and fresh way, and to provide a challenge and interesting environment for our writers and readers. So, yes, it is a literary genre, and to some extent it is one that has been, put up for ridicule as having led to some very popular, but to some very unfavorably reviewed books, such as Dracula or Frankenstein. This is the genre which includes vampires and werewolves who are all over TV and film right now. But I think that it was a very interesting way for people to re-examine who they are within the Hong Kong context and what Hong Kong is. And I think that they did successfully, and it made this anthology a different and an interesting one.
Right. So you and I, Edmund, edited Hotel China when I think pretty much around the time when we both first joined the Writers' Circle. And I just wanted to ask what the editing and publication process was like with Hong Kong Gothic, and if that was different to when we did that for the first time.
Yes, that's right. So I think recalling Hotel China, which we did in 2008 and 2009, that was only the 5th anthology which the Writers' Circle had done, and this one was the 10th. And you and I had many problems with doing Hotel China because there was no system in place. There was no consistent use of a layout assistant or of a printer. There was no record of what had been done before. And so it was done in a very ad hoc manner. In the end, it was done successfully, mainly due to your own high experience, Simon. But it's fair to say that over the subsequent 5 anthologies, the process has become more regularized and more systematized. And so we were able to learn from the benefit of doing it annually, over the last 5 to 6 years. And having, many of the processes already in place of using the same people each time. The editing process was that contributors should submit their story twice, and that it would be edited by the editing committee twice. The first time in May and the second time in August. And also in the middle, it would be reviewed by their peers as part of a compulsory critiquing session involving all of the contributors, which would occur in June. And everyone did that. And so it did mean that every story was reviewed at least 3 times. And in the case of a few stories, it was reviewed for a 4th time. Because one of the things that we decided to do in this anthology was to keep in every story if we possibly could. Sometimes the editors decide that weaker stories should be taken out, but we took the view we would rather keep the stories in and improve them until they reach the necessary quality. And so that's what we did.
Right. That's always a balance that we have to try and strike with the Writers' Circle anthologies. That we really aim to make it a developmental process, and we aim to get everybody in as much as we can, but we still want to provide a quality product that people will go into bookshops and hopefully buy.
That's absolutely right. And that's why I think either approach is acceptable as long as it's made clear to the contributors. And indeed, we made it clear to the contributors that we reserved the right to exclude their story if we felt it was not good enough. However, as a practice, we made every effort to get the writers to revise it until it was good enough. And I'm happy to say that all 22 contributors managed to do that. And so we were able to keep in all of their stories.
That's great. Talk a little bit about the cover.
Yes, well, we were very pleased with the cover this year. We feel it fitted the theme very well. And indeed, we've made a very big effort over the last few anthologies to do that with the cover, to make it relevant to the book and also relevant to the city where we all live. So we always try to hire a Hong Kong resident artist to produce an appropriate cover. And we then provide a forum when we launch the book for that artist to showcase his or her work as well. So whether it is an individual who's such as we had this time, a man called Michel Guy, who is a graphic designer who does artistry work in his spare time, or whether it is, as you have done, Simon, going to SCAD, the art college, and getting students to come up with ideas. We do try to involve local people to get an appropriate cover. So in our case, Michelle drew a Gothicized picture of Hong Kong Island, which is dominated by an image of IFC2 restyled as if a Gothic European cathedral. And it is a bit dark, but then Gothic literature can be a bit dark, and it's done against the menace of a moonlit sky. But we think it's very impressive, and it's been very well received by the members and by the purchasers of the book.
Right. Yeah, it is a great cover, and I think the distinction between perhaps what might have been done in the past and what we try to do now with local artists and making it as much from and about Hong Kong as we can is maybe in the past we might have used a stock image of something that perhaps represents the stories, which is not quite the same, I think.
No, that's exactly right. So when you and I did Hotel China, we took a stock image off the internet. But the last 3 to 4 anthologies, we've always had a customized cover.
Right. I believe that that there have already been some quite favourable reviews in the press so far.
Yes, we're very lucky to have had some good reviews. Reviews obviously are the privilege of the newspaper or magazine as to whether or not they wish to do it. And so we're very happy that the South China Morning Post and Time Out took the time to review and to publish a review of this anthology. And both of them were very complimentary.
And both of those reviews are actually on our website if you go to the press section.
Yes. And so we've been able, on the basis of these strong reviews, to get the book into a large number of bookshops. So we were fortunate that last year, GOD in Hollywood Road took our 2013 anthology, Another Hong Kong, to their bookshop, and then they agreed to take Hong Kong Gothic as well. But in addition to that, the book is stocked in all branches of Bookazine across the city, and it's also stocked in the Dimmock's branches in Discovery Bay and Sai Kung.
And it's also online as well.
Yes, that's right. So since Hotel China, all of the anthologies are available both as a hard copy and as a Kindle copy on Amazon worldwide. You can find that by searching for Hong Kong Writers Circle. And we do find that people overseas will buy that, and it's been very useful. Also, our printer, Chameleon Press, does have all of the anthologies available for purchase on its website.
And I'll put some details of that for the links in the show notes. So that's the publicity that we've had in the press and our sort of retail presence. And I should say that we're recording this interview just before the hard launch of the anthology, just a few days before. So do you like to talk about that?
Sure. So there was some debate, or has been some debate, about whether these anthologies should be launched in December or March. So for Hong Kong Gothic, we actually did both. We have a soft launch in December at the Christmas party, where members could buy copies as Christmas presents, and that was very popular. And then we have a hard launch on the 5th of March in Soho, where both members and non-members are invited to come along and enjoy a fun evening of drink and conversation, where the contributors will read extracts from their stories, and also representatives from our booksellers will be present, and everyone can mingle, and non-members can learn more about the Writers' Circle, and members can get to know one another better.
Right. Yeah. Do a bit of networking. So that's coming up for us, but depending when you're listening to it, that might have already happened. But you can always go to Facebook or our website to find out what events we've got for the Writers' Circle coming up.
And I think that's good because we believe that the anthology is actually one of the biggest benefits that we provide to our members. I mean, one of the things that we do is have social events which occur at least every couple of months and sometimes every month, depending on what else is going on. These are opportunities, again, just to mingle, network, get to know people, find out more about what is going on in the literary scene in Hong Kong. And we also hold usually about 5 to 6 workshops every year in which a speaker will come in and educate members about different aspects of the writing craft. But the two principal benefits, at least in my personal opinion, are that on becoming a member, you're entitled to join a critique group. And these are groups of usually 4 people who meet at their convenience, but again, usually monthly, to share work amongst themselves and to give and receive feedback, which can be very useful in developing a writer's skill and experience, and also confidence, where they can receive positive and negative criticism in a safe environment. And we find this is very popular. Out of our total membership of about 85 people, we have 12 groups of 4 people. So we have 48 members in critique groups right now. And we are always opening new ones. And in the same way, the anthology is a great way for members to see their names in print for the first time. It costs nothing for a member to be part of the anthology, other than the time and effort of writing a good story. It's provided, free by members of the Writers' Circle volunteering to be editors and to put together this book on behalf of the whole group. And we have a mixture of experienced writers in every anthology, and also people writing for the first time. And I would say in Hong Kong Gothic, I think there were 7 people out of the 22 who had not contributed to an anthology before and were seeing their name in print for the first time.
Right.
And I think that can be very helpful, especially when their names appear as part of the book review in the newspaper as having written a good story.
Right.
Can be great for their writing CV.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the whole process of contributing to the anthology is really beneficial for all members, and obviously, and that could also be contributing as an editor as well.
Absolutely right. So what we try to do is always have one editor who's done it before, which in the case of Hong Kong Gothic was me, because I'd done it with you, Simon, for Hotel China. And then at least one editor who hasn't done it before, but who will, as a result of this process of working with somebody who has, be able to do it themselves in a future year.
But the work for the editors doesn't actually end when the book is published.
No, not at all. I mean, editor is in some ways a misnomer, because it's not just editing the stories, it's also working with the layout artist to make sure it looks good, and then working with the printer to get the books printed, and then after that, liaising with the news media to try and get reviews, and then getting it into the bookshops as well. I mean, one final thing which we're very excited about is that I have been interviewed on RTHK Radio 3 by Renata Malhotra Hora, where she has been asking us about the Hong Kong Writers' Circle and my experience of working on Hong Kong Gothic, as well as my experience of writing more generally. And we're very pleased that RTHK has taken an interest in us, and we look forward to that interview being broadcast during March, and it will be available for audiences to listen to both as a podcast on the RTHK Radio 3 website and also on the Writers' Circle website, since we are free to download it and upload it onto our own site.
Right, okay. So keep your eyes peeled on the show notes for links to that. Any final thoughts?
I would say that the literary scene in Hong Kong is quite good although you sometimes have to look for it. I mean, there are many things going on, of which the Writers' Circle is just part. There are such things as the monthly Hong Kong stories, where people tell true stories. There's the monthly Liars League, where people read short works of fiction. There's also the Women in Publishing, which is for the ladies amongst us. And then the Writers' Circle is another key part of this as well. I think, but the one thing the Writers' Circle can do for you is it can put you in touch with all of these things. It can put you in touch with other like-minded readers and writers. We have members from, just about every country you can think of. But and it's a great way for mixing and mingling, finding out what's going on, and generally finding an antidote from what can otherwise be a very work-centric environment in this city sometimes.
Right, and the anthology is is really our sort of showcase for many of the things that we do.
Yes, it's the most publicly available thing that we do, particularly now that we're lucky enough to have it in so many bookshops where people can see it. But, there's a lot going on inside, as I mentioned, like the critique groups and the workshops and the socials. So please, if you're intrigued, come along to one of our socials. You can find the information either on our website, hkwriterscircle.com, or on our Facebook page. And come and get involved. The more the merrier.
Okay, so Edmund Price, co-editor of Hong Kong Gothic, thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon.
It has become a ritual. She pounds her fists on her chest, beating herself until she has no more energy. Her wails haunt the night and ring in my ears. Sometimes it is more than I can bear. I am there to comfort her. I wrap my arms around her, but she does not stop. She cannot feel me. Hours later, she finally cries herself to sleep, and I can take my leave. I never had the intention of leaving her the way I did, but who does? It has been difficult for me also. It torments me to see her in despair. I drift away, but I cannot stay away for very long, as her thoughts and grief call to me and draw my spirit to her. My promise to never leave her drives me on and propels me in my quest. The hospital seems to be going through a slow period, and there is nothing to do. I wander the halls and wait. After the first few days, the antiseptic smell of the halls no longer bothers me. Most of the people here cough or have young, feverish children. Like me, a few patients are here for heart problems, but the cause of my aching heart is unlike theirs. Spirits linger above some hospital beds, unable to make a clean break from this world. They remain until their loved ones are ready to let them go. Sometimes it takes months. Like everyone else, I have come to wait until it is my turn. I am not here to make friends, although there are a few wandering spirits, some in better shape than others. Seeing a spirit in torn service uniform with ghastly injuries relentlessly wandering the corridors saddens me. I have called to him, but he ignores me. He is on a quest of his own. He is searching for his comrades and commanding officer to get his next orders. I imagine he will continue until he finally realizes that he has died. I look up as the lights flicker, and I smile. I'm sure it is little Aryan being her mischievous self again. I met her when she was running through the halls laughing. She left her body when she was 8. Leukemia. She, like the other departed children, always finds something to entertain herself with. I assume they don't want to leave their friends until their parents are ready to join them. I turn my head at the sound of running footsteps. The double doors slam open as a stretcher speeds towards the emergency room. Surrounded by nurses, doctors, and IV pumps, I catch a glimpse of a young man. He is still alive, I think. I can't help but wonder if he could be the one, and follow. That was Lavender Song by Nancy K.W. Leung.
It was a dark and a stormy night. Everyone was at the winding. They weren't the winding type. So they went up on the train, bitch, where the weather was howling. Oh, oh, my mind.
It was a dark and stormy night. The rain fell in torrents, except at occasional intervals when it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept up the streets, for it is in London that our scene lies, rattling along the housetops and fiercely agitating the scanty flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness. So begins Paul Clifford by Edward Bulwer-Lytton, an opening line of such infamy that it has its own contest. The Bulwer-Lytton Fiction Contest, run by the English department of the San Jose State University, challenges entrants to compose the opening sentence to the worst of all possible novels. It is an example of purple prose, a highly melodramatic and florid style of writing that draws excessive attention to itself. It's useful to look at writing like this to avoid purple patches in our own work. What is so bad about this opening sentence? The first clause, "It was a dark and stormy night," is a cliché, although to be fair to Mr. Bulwer-Lytton, it may not have been when he originally wrote it. Nevertheless, modern readers have become sensitive to the distinctive rhythm of a phrase like that, just as we have with "Once Upon a Time," for example. You could hum the phrase and people could guess what it was. The sentence as a whole has a surfeit of clauses, 10 as I count them, and the subordination of each successive clause leads us on a rather tiring journey from the rain, via the wind, the streets, the housetops, the lamps, until we finally end with the darkness. It's not really a point of view violation, but almost. What's more, the 9 clauses that follow the first are actually redundant. They merely restate the fact that it was a dark and stormy night. Aside from the meandering structure of the sentence, I would suggest that there are other problems that make it awkward. For a start, there is the backtracking of "the rain fell in torrents," except at occasional intervals, which sounds like he has just changed his mind. Even within that, the word "occasional" is redundant. Anything that happens at intervals is occasional, isn't it? Perhaps he was trying to make the distinction with regular intervals, but he has ended up with an awkward phrase. Then there is a slight grammatical shift from the wind which swept up the streets and is then rattling and agitating. I might prefer the wind to be sweeping up the streets to keep it consistent. The contrasting descriptions, torrential rain and occasional intervals, the gusting wind and the scanty flames, leads to an overall inconsistency of image. I don't know whether I should be impressed by the wind or feel sorry for the lamp flames. Then, of course, we have the parenthesis, "for it is in London that our scene lies," which really should be worked into the story elsewhere. Here, it feels shoehorned. So, what is the value of examining this silly sentence? Paul West in the New York Times makes an interesting point. It takes a certain amount of sass to speak up for prose that's rich, succulent, and full of novelty. Purple is immoral, undemocratic, and insincere, at best artsy, at worst the exterminating angel of depravity. So long as originality and lexical precision prevail, the sentient writer has a right to immerse himself or herself in phenomena and come up with as personal a version as can be. A writer who can't do purple is missing a trick. A writer who does purple all the time ought to have more tricks. End quote. Therein, I think, is the value of the Bulwer-Lytton Fiction Contest. Being able to emulate this opening sentence, with all of its obvious and subtle literary violations, shows a writer that is comfortable with their craft. Here's the winning entry from 2014. When the dead moose floated into view, the famished crew cheered. This had to mean land, but Captain Walgrove, flinty-eyed and clear-headed thanks to the starvation cleanse in progress, gave fateful orders to remain on the original course and await the appearance of a second and confirming moose. So, give it a try. Write the worst opening line to a novel that you can. It's not quite as easy as Edward Bulwer-Lytton makes it seem. The Hong Kong Writers' Circle podcast, episode 10, Hong Kong Gothic, was produced by me, Simon Overton. For more information, including show notes and the podcast archive, please visit our website, hkwriterscircle.com. Excerpts were from The Girl Above by Ian Greenfield, The Taxidermist by Sophia Greengrass, and Lavender Song by Nancy K.W. Leung, from the collection Hong Kong Gothic, edited by Kate Hawkins, Edmund Price, and Marnie Walker, published by the Hong Kong Writers' Circle. The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, now in the public domain. Dictionary of Literary Terms and Literary Theory by J. A. Cuddon, published by Penguin. Paul Clifford by Edward Bulwer-Lytton, now in the public domain. The Bulwer-Lytton Fiction Contest, online at bulwer-lytton.com, and In Defense of Purple Prose by Paul West, online at nytimes.com. Interlude music for this episode was The Crazy Cries of Love by Joni Mitchell, sourced from YouTube. The music was by Quantum Jazz from the album End of the Line, used under the terms of a Creative Commons Attribution and Share-alike license. Finally, many thanks to Katrina Teh for the podcast artwork.